Our X-Files. Welcome to our X-Files vault. Regular people talking about unexplained phenomena. UFOs. Ghosts. Cryptids. Hidden archaeology. Weird science. Our stories. Our takes. Our X-Files vault.
Okay, I have with me here Dave White, one of the more knowledgeable people you'll find, both on the modern UFO phenomena and on the possibility that aliens aided humans at the dawn of civilization. Tonight, he's going to make the case that aliens have helped us in the past and are helping us in the present. He's also going to explain why he thinks some of the more troubling phenomena associated with aliens, such as cattle mutilations, abductions, or UAPs, might in fact be a part of a government disinformation program. I myself am not yet convinced of a lot of these things, but I have an open mind, and Dave's knowledge runs very deep on this stuff. So I'm absolutely eager to hear what he has to say, and I have an open mind on it. I am going to challenge him a little to help explore a little beyond the standard aliens are good or aliens are bad theories. It's important for the show to try to always bring something new to the conversation, but also because the channel is working on a documentary called Invasion. What would an alien takeover look like? Both Dave and I are screenwriters. And while I know Dave likes to follow the evidence, I'm going to appeal a little bit to his creative side to see if he can help explore some fresh angles on the subject. And I want to finally add a disclaimer. These discussions are just intellectual exercises, entertainment. No one should be using anything they hear on a podcast like this to join up some dark web conspiracy. Some of what you'll hear will be familiar, but tonight we're going to try to chart new territory and propose some theories you haven't heard before anywhere else. We're going to bring the discussion to some weird places, step down a few dark alleys where no one has yet ventured. This is Quantum Mirror, where reality shifts as soon as you shine a light on it. Hey, Dave, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I know you're very busy, but looking forward to this because I can't think of too many people whose knowledge goes deeper than yours on a lot of these topics. So let's get to it. So the first question I have is, the other day when I mentioned to you about the idea of the Invasion Project, your concern was, your view is that aliens have been here to help us and are currently help us. So give me your reasoning on that, if you don't mind.
Sure, no problem. It's really sort of a three-part response to that. The first part is that there is evidence of ancient civilizations that moved megalithic stones in a way that it does not appear to be capable of the local population at that time, who were either using stone on stone, andesite balls hitting, less hard stone, or if they were lucky, Bronze Age tools. But there are plenty of locations like at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, or other, a dozen, 100 other sites around Central and South America, where they were working with granite, where they were working with andesite, and they didn't have bronze tools. There's just almost no way that they could have done this with their current level of technology. They had to have had help. They had to have had higher technology. There are plenty of evidence in Egypt that whatever civilization was there prior to the dynastic Egyptians had the ability to use 6-foot saw blades, cutting hard granite, not limestone or sandstone, and actually using core drills as well. Flinders Petrie actually recovered a core drill tube of granite that you just can't do with the dynastic Egyptian technology that they had, as little as they had. So there's that evidence, whether we want to call those aliens or not. The whole idea about ancient aliens, which I found out today is actually a copyrighted term by the History Channel. But you can't copyright ancient astronauts, so we could always call it that too. There appears to have been some level of extreme technological civilization across the earth that left behind megalithic structures, from Egypt to Cuzco to Bolivia to Easter Island. There's actually a megalithic stone wall that was buried under the accumulated, feet of dirt that looks just like the same megalithic stone constructions that you find in Cuzco and Egypt. And you have places like Gunung Padang in Indonesia, where some civilization was able to take 80-ton tubes of basalt and pile them up to make a series of platforms. This was not done by people who had reed boats. The interesting thing is those basalt tubes, they're as big as logs, they were carried from a different island. So whoever had the technology to pile these things up also had to have the technology to carry them across water, and there's just no evidence that the local populations had that capability. That site, by the way, also had areas that were built below current water level, which suggests that this was something that happened before the mega disaster that rose the ocean levels anywhere from 200 to 300 feet in a very short period of time. So we have that basis of a worldwide culture that was able to cut stone and, interestingly enough, leave no debris fields behind. We have debris fields in Egypt from the dynastic Egyptians where they carved limestone and left big debris fields. But we have other sites like Sacsayhuaman, like the Longyu Caves in China, where they excavated in the Longyu Caves situation, where they excavated 20 to 30 caves below ground. There's as much as 2 million cubic feet of stone that just vanished. There's no evidence of it ever having been chipped and carried away. There is a tool that's available right now that basically works as a sublimation tool. It has a blade that's basically a plasma cutting torch that when it strikes whatever it's attuned to, it's currently being used to remove rust and paint off of iron and steel. It sublimates that material. It basically turns it into a gas. And there is a possibility that maybe that's the cutting torch that was used in these sites where it looks like the stone was smoothed down, almost like with a knife. In many cases, those smoothed down areas have straight lines in them, either rectangular depressions where it looks like somebody scooped something out with like a shoebox, or they left stepping stone patterns like on the face of some of the stones at Ollantaytambo. So we have that evidence of a highly technologically, highly advanced civilization that does not match up with the locals of those time periods, especially if we're talking 10,000 BC. We have legends that support that. Graham Hancock in the early pages, around page 50 or so, of Fingerprints of the Gods, talks about a legend that the Inca told the Spanish when the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, the 1500s, where there was this godlike figure named Viracocha, whose name means foam of the sea because of the way he departed. Viracocha had a group of other people with him that were apparently in some flying craft, because at one point the Inca relate this legend that Viracocha was being threatened by locals who were going to stone him to death for reasons that wasn't clear. And Viracocha fell to his knees and put his hands up to heaven and called down the fire of heaven, which terrified the locals so much that they gave up their idea of stoning him to death. Viracocha was very much like the legends of Oannes in Sumeria and Thoth in Egypt. They were bearded white men. It's what they were called, bearded white men, who came up out of the water, who taught civilization to the people at that time, and then disappeared back in the water. Viracocha's name comes from the fact that when he left, he walked into the ocean and disappeared. And they called him the foam of the sea, the foam of the ocean. We also have evidence that, at least in modern times, UFOs have apparently engaged with our military craft, and almost every single time they've taken a non-fatal reaction to the provocation that we have given them. The most famous one that we know of is the 1976 Tehran UFO incident, where the Iranian Air Force was flying F-4 Phantoms from our inventory. And a UFO was spotted not far from the Tehran airport, shining a light down at the ground, a big disc. We don't really know exactly how big. This report came to us, by the way, through a Freedom of Information Act report, where this document was found, I believe, as a State Department briefing that came from the people in Iran at the time that worked for the US government. The Air Force vectored in an F-4 that was going to shoot a missile at this thing. And when it got within 20 miles, which was the range of this air-to-air missile, all of its electronics and hydraulics failed simultaneously. This thing basically went into brick mode. And the pilot hand maneuvered the stick away, so it started falling away from where the UFO was. And when it got back out to the excess 20-mile range, everything came right back on just fine. Well, the Iranian Air Force wasn't going to let that stop them, so they sent another F-4 in, and the exact same thing happened. All of its electronics and hydraulics failed simultaneously. Meanwhile, with the second one, a little red globe left this larger UFO and came at the F-4. And when it also got out of the way and was headed the wrong direction, and its electronics and avionics came back on, the little red UFO went right back to the big UFO and blended back into it. Could they have shot him down? If they can turn off everything in an F-4, you got to think they probably have some technology that could have done some damage. There are multiple incidents like this that have come to us through Freedom of Information Act files. A really good book on this case is Timothy Good's Above Top Secret, where he lays out case after case after case. These are not people saying, I saw something. These are reports. There's a really famous one of a missile site where the ground detectors inside the perimeter of the fenced-in area where the blast doors are for a Minuteman missile silo, the ground detectors go off. So they send in a response team. Response team, by the way, is armed so that they can take care of anything, including people trying to blow up a missile in the silo or trying to steal a nuclear weapon. They get to about a mile away and they find out that this thing is a UFO they claimed as big as a football field, shining a light down at the blast doors. The response team is ordered to go ahead and make the UFO leave. They get about a half a mile away and they go, no, we're not going to do that. And they basically just sit there and watch. And after a while, the UFO's lights turn off and it goes straight up. It only appears at radar at 2,000 feet. And then it continues straight up to 200,000 feet where it goes off of radar. We know about this event because this event was included in a flash report. A flash report is the first thing on the desk of the Joint Chiefs of Staff every morning. And it involves anything to do with not just a nuclear weapon, but any nuclear weapon delivery vehicles, which might be a missile base, B-52, an aircraft carrier, whatever's carrying that nuclear weapon. This is not something that I think the US government would fake. This is something that it sounds like is an actual report of an actual UFO interfering with our nuclear weapons. And in this particular case, the next morning they checked the warheads, and this particular missile had 10 independently targeted reentry vehicles, MIRVs. Each of these 10 had a new coordinate applied to it for where these warheads were going to land. They've never released the information, as far as I know, where these 10 new coordinates were. It would be interesting if it was like Pittsburgh and, Cleveland and Cincinnati and whatever, and maybe they're trying to give us a message with what those 10 new coordinates are. It would be really nice to hear that information, because since this was in a flash report, this sounds like this was an actual event. So we see time and time again, UFOs connecting with our military and taking a non-lethal action, even though, like in the Tehran incident and in many others, we were trying to shoot them down. We were trying to blow them up. There is evidence that we may have done that with craft like the Cape Girardeau incident in 1941, which had a big gash at the side, or the 1947 Roswell crash, which some people theorize was either hit by lightning or was maybe hit with a missile because it was really close to some of the test ranges. You would think at this point, if they had that technology in sight, in this planet's atmosphere, and they were able to connect with our military so that they're not just holograms, they're actually physically interacting with our technology, You'd think if they wanted to take us over, they could do it in a heartbeat, but they haven't. There's the third part. The third part of this is, in recent times, say the last 70 to 80 years, since not just Roswell, but since Cape Girardeau in 1941, and since the Battle of Los Angeles in 1942, our military has, what's the best word for it? They have done everything within their power to take control and maintain control over whatever they think is in their best and our national interests. Okay? We have seen so many operations where the military and now the CIA have gone far beyond what we think would have been allowable for U.S. personnel in their quest to do what they think is necessary to keep us private, to keep us secret. A lot of people have heard of MK Ultra, which was at first derided as being myth and legend and fairy tales, and people are making this up. And then they happened to find 20,000 pages of documents just on MK Ultra that the CIA forgot that they had. But MK Ultra was the third part of this program that went back to like the 1950s. There was a project called Project Artichoke, which was started under the auspices of the CIA with John Foster Dulles. William Dulles, his brother. This was an assassination program. This was an effort to see if we could create people who would kill somebody despite the threat to their own being. So basically suicide one-way missions. That was Project Artichoke in 1951. That led to MK Ultra, which started in 1953. That continued until it became MK Search in 1964, which supposedly was reduced in scope. I think what that really means is this is the public part. The rest of it we're never going to tell you about. And then MK Search became MK Often, which started in 1966, and then started to include things like black magic and the occult. And one of the reasons that the CIA said they needed to follow this was because they claimed the Russians were doing the same thing. So, if the bad guys are doing it, you got to be able to do it too. This was their rationale. And those are only the projects that we know about. Back in 1973, when the Watergate fiasco began to hit the airwaves, it turned out that I think it was E. Howard Hunt had actually asked the CIA during Watergate if he had a good burglar that could break open locks. And when that got to the head of the CIA in 1973, he's like, wait a minute, we should have never been doing that, not on American soil. We could get broken up for this, which is exactly what Kennedy wanted to do in 1963. So the CIA in 1973 decided to put together a list of all the worst programs that the CIA had done, so that the director of the CIA wouldn't get blindsided. And they put out this list called the Family Jewels. You can read about this on YouTube and Wikipedia and even on the CIA website. They actually have this document that lists, one right after the other, all these crimes. I mean, they're not all crimes, but most of them are horrible crimes that are not allowed under the CIA charter, including, assassinations, including using drugs to try to make people like MK Ultra into assassins, all this kind of stuff. Every one of those has been declassified except Family Jewel number 1. And there's a black bar over this paragraph that's about 5 lines long, and there's a supporting document that's 2 pages that's completely blacked out. We still don't know what that Family Jewel number 1 is. There are 2 theories. They don't mention anything about the Kennedy assassination, Family Jewels, but they mention plenty of other assassinations and attempts on Castro's. They also don't mention anything about UFOs. So Family Jewel 1 is either the Kennedy assassination and the CIA involvement in it, or UFOs. It may be that UFOs was such a forbidden subject that even in that document, they couldn't talk about that subject. It's very possible. We know that the US military had done horrible things to our own people. The Tuskegee Airmen incident didn't just happen over a couple of years and we screwed up and we changed our minds. This thing went on for 40 years. From the 1930s all the way into the 1970s, we took US airmen and did not tell them that we were injecting them with syphilis and then let them die so that we could find out what happens when people get syphilis. It's not treated. That's barbaric. And we admitted that. And one of the reasons that the Black population is not really willing to go out and get vaccines from our government-sponsored medical facilities is because of things like Tuskegee Airmen and MK Ultra and other things. So in order to say that alien abductions come from aliens, you have to say two things. You have to say, one, the aliens need to abduct us. And I'm not sure that there's a proven need for them to do that. They can watch us. They can probably see everything we do. If we have technology that can see through walls and record everything from our smartphones, I'm pretty sure they have the same kind of technology. The second thing you have to be able to do, though, is you have to say the likeliest candidate, the US government and its military, is not the ones doing the abductions. And I think that's a harder thing to prove. Obviously, you're trying to prove a negative, but I think the evidence of everything that the US military and parts of our government, like the CIA, have done over the last 80 years shows that they would be perfectly willing to abduct people and make the people that they're blaming it on, the aliens, the non-terrestrial, human intelligences, whatever, that they're the bad guys. There's a really famous operation called Operation Northwoods, which was spun up in 1962 by the CIA and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This was a plan to create false flag events involving us in Cuba, including things like hijacking planes and crashing them and sinking boats full of Cuban refugees, and then blaming this on Fidel Castro so we would have a pretext to invade the island. This was such a big deal that it went all the way to the top of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Kennedy had to actually cancel this. He actually had to cast a deciding vote and said, no, we're not doing this. This is not America. We don't do this kind of crap. Not on our own people. But we had people in this country willing to take that opportunity, willing to take those steps because they thought it was in our national interest to get Fidel out of Cuba and invade the island, which would have cost hundreds of thousands of casualties or more if it became a nuclear exchange. So we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that our government has been willing to do horrible, terrible, fatal things to our own people. We can also see in modern times, in this year, that the Pentagon right now is willing to allow investigators and the general public to believe that there are 5 videos of objects that the Pentagon claims are unidentified. That's wrong. That's a lie. The Pentagon is lying. It's easily provable that all 5 of these objects, but with an open mind and with a knowledge of how infrared cameras work and how cell phone cameras work, you can prove that each of these are not unidentified. They're easily identifiable by what they are. Mick West is just one of the people who does a great job showing how an infrared blur is not the object that you're seeing. You're seeing the heat signature from the back end of a jet. And he has duplicated this in his videos. So we can show that not just that the government is willing to hurt and kill its own people for its own interests. And when I say the government, I mean branches of people in certain departments in certain branches of the government are willing to do whatever it takes, including, making other people look like the bad guy. And we're also able to show in the current time frame that the Pentagon is willing to allow misinformation to flood the airwaves for some purpose of their own. The only thing I can figure is they want it to be more difficult for us to tell when we're seeing an actual UFO and when it might be a black project. However, these incidents that they've released, we're not seeing the kind of video that we could have seen if somebody had a photograph or a video of the Phoenix Lights. There's only one purported video of that, and it's 8 o'clock at night, it's dark, you see a shape across the sky. There's really not much to be able to tell. But when you have, like, say, for example, the 2007 Stephenville UFO, this thing was as big as a super Walmart, according to the 200 witnesses that saw this. And it was flashing sigils, flashing lights of some sort of communication on the side. You want to show us something that says this is unidentified, show us that. Don't show us, some idiot with a cell phone camera and a $100 lens that's got a little triangle of everything, of every light source in the sky, and call that a fleet of triangular shaped UFOs.
So Dave, let me just ask, why wouldn't they? Like, so for instance, if you're saying that they were willing to give us fake data on UAPs filmed by the Navy, and in order to create, I guess, an impression that there are unexplained forces out there or aliens or whatever, why wouldn't they be willing to show the real information if it achieves the same objective, only even easier, because it's actually the real thing?
Well, this goes back again to 47 in Roswell, 42 the Battle of LA, 41 Cape Girardeau. In each of those incidences, there was some kind of craft involved that was beyond our knowledge, beyond our capability. And for our military to admit that some foreign power, whether on this planet or off this planet, whether of this dimension or a different dimension, was able to bring that thing to our surface and get away with it, makes our military look incompetent, feeble. We look weak to our enemies.
Then why fake the UAP thing? It seems like it's the same thing. That does the same thing, doesn't it?
So we start with the idea that our military does not want to look weak. Okay? We've looked weak before, and we believe that if you look weak, you're inviting an attack or an invasion. Because we couldn't accept that, we have grown this insular society where no one will take the initiative to say they're here and there's nothing we can do about it. A good example is the Phoenix Lights. Most people, when they think of the Phoenix Lights event, think of these 5 or 6 white lights in a sort of an arc behind the hills west of Phoenix, except that's the event that happened at 10 p.m. The original event moved from the Las Vegas, Nevada area across 3 states, came all the way down to Phoenix, turned around and went back, was seen by 800 people, but no one got a clear picture of it. When this started getting out into the news, within 2 hours, 10 o'clock p.m., somebody took a helicopter out over one of the ranges west of Phoenix and dropped flares. Why did they do this? Because they wanted to obfuscate the story. They wanted to make it harder for people to know what it was. And that way people could come back later and go, oh, look, that light, the Phoenix Lights, it was just flares west of the mountains. Because here you can see how they all go out as they go behind the peaks of the mountains. Yes, those were flares, but that then doesn't cover what happened at 8 o'clock. And it obfuscates, it confuses people, it makes it harder to know what the truth was. And then they have plausible deniability. People will go on Wikipedia and hear that the Phoenix Lights was just flares dropped west of the mountains. Except, why did the US government decide right then, 2 hours after this massive UFO sighting, to see flares dropping west of there, just coincidentally, so that they can claim that's what the UFO really was? That was them actively trying to make this harder for us to figure out. That's what they're doing now.
But then again, why fake the UAP thing? So.
Right. Well, we know that one of my articles, one of the first articles I put on our X-Files website, was a compilation. It was actually a larger story that was first written for the Daily Grail website, but I wanted to expand it a little bit more. And it shows how the U.S. military, the Pentagon, actively tried to interfere with UFO investigations and UFO investigation groups, including civilian groups. They have done this from the start, since the 40s and 50s. Ostensibly, early on in the 50s, one of their problems was they worried that the Soviets could create a UFO flap which would overwhelm our communication systems. Because back then, phone services were very minimal. Even today, if you have a natural disaster like an earthquake, you'll not only have interruptions of services because of the actual physical effects, but you'll have tens of millions of people both trying to call out and trying to call in, and that could paralyze a communication network. Okay, so I understand that might have been one of their reasons, but it seems to be a deeper reason. For example, one of the few actual pieces of factual evidence we have about the Roswell incident is that 6 months of communication to Roswell Army Airfield, covering that period in 1947, simply vanished. 6 months, not just of outgoing messages, but of incoming messages as well. So both sides of a conversation for 6 months for this entire airfield, just gone. Oh, we lost it in a fire. Yeah, show me how anybody else, like at a major airfield like Edwards Air Force Base or Kirtland or someplace like that, lost 6 months of all their incoming and outgoing communication. We may not actually be able to put our fingers on the evidence. We can put our fingers on that and say that was the military covering up something. They don't know what they were covering up, but they were covering up something. It's like a broken door. If you come home and you find your door has been broken in, you can tell somebody got into your apartment or your house. You may not know what they stole, but you got a pretty good idea there was a break-in. And that 6-month window where everything was taken out, there's some cover-up going on there. The other option is, why would they be doing this? Is because we're now kind of, in a 3-way Cold War. It used to just be us and the Soviets. Now the Chinese are involved, and they're heavily involved. We have computer hacking going back and forth, both the Russians and the Chinese. And, I'm guessing we and our proxies, the Israelites, are doing the same thing. I don't know if we can still call them the Israelites. Probably should call them the Israelis. Remove the religious overtone. We know that they're intent in finding everything they can out about our current technology. We know that we've had lots of information stolen from suppliers to our military because their ability to keep out hackers is much less advanced than, say, the military networks. But if we have subcontractors creating the skin for the F-35, for example, the Chinese don't have to hack into an Air Force or a military government website. They can hack into the subcontractor's website. All they need to do is find out what kind of chemicals are being, purchased and in what quantity. They have already a head start on where we were 20 years ago. So it's entirely possible that the Pentagon and the military and different branches of our government might want to feed false data to our adversaries, to our perceived adversaries. And it's also possible that they want it to be more difficult for our own population to be able to determine what is a UFO and what's not. One of the reasons behind that is that then our potential adversaries might believe that we have back-engineered UFO technology. And if so, it would worry them enough that maybe they wouldn't attack us until we could actually figure out how to back-engineer this technology. Because I don't think we have.
Question, did you happen to read, say, a couple of weeks ago, the article in the Wall Street Journal on the UAP incident with the Naval? They talked about a patent that was applied for by a company working for the Pentagon in 2018, where they're working on an advanced type of plasma hologram.
Yes.
What did you think of that? Just curious your thoughts.
I wish I had this guy's name. There's a really good discussion of the 2 locations where these 5 Pentagon UAP incidents have taken place. Some of them, I believe 3 of them, are off the coast of San Diego in a military test zone where no one's supposed to be overflying it. It's a restricted flight zone. The others are on the East Coast, southeast of Virginia, which is also a no-fly military-only test zone. In both of these locations, this one YouTube viewer, and I'll find the name of this guy and I'll put a link in the description for this podcast. He was able to show that on the shore in both of these locations, there are old 1930s, 1940s massive hangars where we used to have dirigibles and blimps that we had worked on during the 30s and 40s and are now active again because we're beginning to realize that some of the best heavy lift vehicles are very large blimps using helium, except our helium supplies are a little wonky these days, so there's some problems about that. This fellow and the other researchers that he uses have shown that these sites are currently now being crewed and now being used, and there is enough infrastructure there that if they wanted to broadcast plasma discharges over a naval fleet, say our own fleet, to confuse their radar, we are fully technically capable of doing it. And I've actually said probably the next UAP video that the Pentagon is going to release is going to be somebody with a cell phone camera taking a picture of an actual radar setup on a ship, showing all these different plasma balls making it hard for you to know as a radar operator what's real and what's not. It's interesting to know that the fourth UAP video that was released, the one of the supposedly glowing ball descending into the water and disappearing.
Yeah.
Well, number one, it took about 6 minutes for this thing to descend in the water. So it didn't just go whoop, it took 6 minutes. And they edited it to make it look like it was really fast. But if you read the time clock on there, it's clear that it took a long time for this to happen. So there's an instance right there of the Pentagon deliberately making it look not what it really was. But that was also shot by a cell phone camera off of the equipment in the command and control room. So it wasn't the actual display, it was somebody's cell phone camera of a display. The fifth one of the triangles was also a cell phone camera. So it's possible that they will put a level of civilian control in there so that you don't get the crisp detail of the actual technology. I would think it's still sort of a classification issue because you're obviously not, you're showing state-of-the-art technology. I don't know why they would allow that to be released, but apparently it behooves them. Maybe that technology isn't quite as state-of-the-art as some of the other things, like on the Aegis missile cruisers.
Right. I remember when I was actually, I felt somewhat vindicated when I saw that article a couple of weeks ago because I have no technical experience. When I first saw that footage a couple of years ago, my theory was that it was a hologram. And I based my reasoning on the simple fact that the two incidents that were revealed to us came during naval exercises, one off the West Coast, one off the East Coast. And I find it awfully coincidental that something happens to happen just during naval exercises. I mean, that's the perfect time if you're going to be testing out a new technology. That would be the place you want to do it, right? And you want to see how everybody reacts on the ships and in the planes. And then also when I looked at the video itself, that looked to me like something that was not an object moving, but something that was, like if you shine a spotlight in the sky off a cloud, you're just moving a little bit, but it's moving a lot, jumping all around. So it looked to me like if you were directing a hologram, like I said, I'm not an engineer and I don't know what kind of technology it would take to do that, especially if you're actually going to put a plasma up there. But if you were able to move it down from a distance, it would move and kind of jump. It would move kind of jumpy like that. And it would also be able to jump up, move around very fast because it's not actually anything moving, but that was my amateur view of it. The one thing where I differ on the article in the Wall Street Journal, that one strongly implied that this was a technology being used by one of our adversaries, so the Chinese or the Russians. That doesn't make any sense to me because if you have a technology like that, it's obviously extremely valuable, and its purpose is to deceive your enemy into thinking you have planes that you don't actually have up there. But once the enemy knows that you have that technology, it really loses most of its effectiveness because you kind of know that they have it. So you want to keep something like that a secret. So there's no way if you were the Chinese or the Russians, you would risk bringing that out and testing it on a U.S. fleet. You would just never risk it. You would save it until wartime and then break it out. So that didn't make. So to me, it only made sense if it was somebody testing something like that. It had to be United States or a contractor working for the United States. But
it could also be that what they know, they're not really trying to let it all out, let the cat completely out of the bag. It may be, say, China is testing this thing in the middle of the Mongolian desert, and we're saying, hey, we're going to do the same thing because we know you've already got it.
Sure.
You don't have to tell the Chinese we know doing it. We don't have to actually have pictures of that. The possibility that this is happening in the United States in test waters, that would be a great place for them to first test it. It would the problem is if you've got one branch, say the Air Force, testing plasma displays over the U.S. Navy, and the Navy has weapons, and there's probably Russian submarines shadowing them, and sometimes Russian trawlers, just like there are Chinese fishing vessels all over the South China Sea. You don't necessarily want to try to make it look like somebody is preparing to attack because you might spook somebody and they might take the wrong action.
Right.
It may be that there are people higher level in the U.S. Navy that knows what's going on, but it doesn't appear with the rank and file that they have been made privy to some of these tests. I also want to point out that, these 5 UAP videos that the Pentagon has authorized or has admitted that they were taken by U.S. Navy personnel. That's all they're admitting. They're saying that they're unidentified, but they're not admitting anything else. They're not even claiming that these were of the actual objects that were spotted in 2004 with the Nimitz incident. They're just saying, yes, these were taken by U.S. military personnel. That's it. There are 3 other incidents that really stand out as indicative of what the U.S. military and government are capable of and how they're using it in reaction and in relation to U.S. civilian airplanes. And those started in 2017 with an incident that happened between Nevada, California, Oregon, and Washington State. And this was only a few months after the first 3 videos were released by To the Stars Academy and Tom DeLonge. There was a craft that was later described as 30 to 40 feet long, all white, cylindrical, no control surfaces visible. However, this was at a 3 or 4 mile range. This thing was spotted leaving the southwestern Nevada area, not far from Area 51, flying into California airspace at Mach 1.5 and making a more than 90-degree turn until it was going due north. It started passing commercial airliners who were flying from California to Seattle, Washington, and Portland. And it was spotted by multiple flight crews. However, it dropped off of radar somewhere between California and Oregon. Now, that's not a hard trick to do. The F-35s, I pointed out, have this capability where they have magnetically locked metal pieces that are designed to give a radar reflection when they're flying in civilian airspace, because you don't want to have a plane with no radar signature flying around when you've got civilian aircraft, because somebody might, cross into them. So they have these little things attached, and whenever they want to go back to stealthy mode, they just turn off the magnet, these things drop off, and boom, you're invisible again, which, by the way, is a really neat trick if you want to invade somebody's airspace and you want to look like a, commercial airliner, and then you get right near the airport and all of a sudden you're invisible to radar and you can then go on a bombing run. That's a technological advancement that the military wants to use. Regardless, this little craft did this same thing. Dropped off of radar, but was instantly totally visible to all these air crews. As it gets towards Oregon, people start freaking out because they don't know what this is. And the FAA winds up either contacting or being contacted by somebody in charge of, for want of a better term, the Civil Air Patrol, who vectors in F-15s armed to engage this thing. And they then say, get the commercial airlines out of the way, we're going to shoot this thing down. And the civilian airliners are like, what the hell does that mean? Do we land? Do we go left or right? Do we go up or down? They have no clue what they're doing. We looked totally unprepared for this. This happens in 2017. Usually when an incident like this happens, Stephenville, Texas, 2007 is a perfect example. The people who wanted information about that incident wanted the radar tapes, and the FAA lied about it multiple times in front of a judge until the judge threatened to start putting people's butts in jail, and then, okay, finally, we'll give it. In this instance, they didn't just have the radar tapes ready in 4 months, they had the audio tapes between the pilots in the commercial aircraft, the FAA controllers, and a guy whose code word was redacted in the audio, who was vectoring in the fighters. They had this all available in February, which was in some ways record time, but also showed exactly that something was flying from our own airspace, through our airspace, not on radar, supposedly tic-tac shaped, just like something that we had just described 3 months before. And it was so effective that at the end of that month, in the first week of March, Vladimir Putin came out with this special presentation about his stealth nuclear-powered cruise missile. And the little video showed like a target not of New York or Washington, D.C., but of southern Florida, where our ex-president used to live. It's interesting that that incident happened in such close proximity to the Tic-Tac UFO, and they stressed over and over again, Tic-Tac UFO, even though none of the videos show a Tic-Tac UFO. None of them. And in fact, I believe when To the Stars first came out with the first 3 videos, they claimed all 3 of those videos were of the Nimitz incident in 2004. We now have realized that the second and the third were from the East Coast, from, I want to say the USS Washington or the Omaha. I'm not sure which one it was. But they were 2014, 2015. They had nothing to do with it. But they wanted this idea of the Tic Tac UFO implanted in our brain. You can read all about this 2017 incident in 2 articles on the Drive website. They do a remarkably good job of following up on aircraft and military technology and black projects, and they covered this in perfect detail, including transcripts of all the audio. Then, after this 2017 incident, there have been at least 2 more incidents in the Southwest where a white Tic Tac thing flew bonkers right over a commercial aircraft. In one case, it was spotted by 2 pilots, one going in each direction. And this thing was going like a bat out of hell. It was
so you think that's military technology?
Well, it's not that much different from a stealth cruise missile that we have now. I mean, yeah, we can fly those things right now. However, it's interesting that in all 3 cases, none of these objects did any kind of weaving or twisting and turning. When it went from Nevada to California to Oregon, it made 1 turn. Other than that, it was a complete straight line. Same thing with the Southwest incidents. I believe one was earlier this year, 2021, and the other one was, I think, 2018. So they've been pretty recent. They're not doing any unusual aeronautical maneuvers. They're just very fast. We know that we've been testing hypersonic missiles. We know the Russians have been testing hypersonic missiles, something that might go Mach 3, Mach 4, some claims Mach 20. We don't know. But those are not flat-sided, super Walmart-shaped, hovering, silent, black triangle UFOs. That's not our U.S. government. Oh, and by the way, I want to point out that there's a wonderful old gentleman who's in his 80s now, lives in Northeast Indiana. I had a chance to speak with him. He says he and his wife saw a black triangle, flat-sided, in the early 60s, like 1963, 1964, in Indiana.
So what do you mean by flat-sided? Do you mean like something that is the standard one that's flying overhead and you look up and you see the bottom of the triangle, or do you mean like more like a pyramid?
Not necessarily. It's more like it's like a building.
Like a pyramid?
No, not a pyramid.
No.
Flat, perpendicular to the ground, flat-sided, flat-topped, flat.
So a two-dimensional object? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no, 3-dimensional. Absolutely 3-dimensional. The one that was described in the Phoenix Lights event was just described as a chevron with bright, large lights along the bottom. Nobody could really tell how thick it was or how.
So maybe like an arrowhead? Would that be something similar to an arrowhead, only in a triangular? I'm trying to imagine what you mean.
No, because what they're trying to show us is this is as unaerodynamic as you could possibly imagine. Okay, the sides are not, triangular. They're not like a B-2, plane, which is arrowhead shaped, but it's aerodynamic. It's got thin wings at the front. They go a little thicker in the middle, and they're thin at the back. These are.
I mean an arrowhead that's like standing up, not an arrowhead that's in firing position, but standing up.
Not like an arrowhead standing up. It's like it has a point facing you or a side facing you, and then it's a triangle. It's like, I don't know.
But that is like a pyramid, isn't it? Isn't that what a pyramid is?
No, a pyramid is 5-sided. 4 sides plus a flat bottom and a point at the top. This is not a pyramid. This is a flat side with a flat top that has 3 sides rising up from the vertical. Some of these, like the one in southern Illinois in the year 2000 that was spotted as far as, I think, St. Louis. This one was also spotted north of Chicago about 6 or 7 hours earlier. This one was spotted by multiple police departments in the middle of the night. This thing had windows on the side, and it had big lights in the back. So when it was leaving, it looked like it had bay windows and balconies on it or something. It's almost like they're trying to show us there's no way your people could be flying this. It's like they're trying to prove to us this is not your technology. That, in many ways, if you're looking for a connection between the modern visitors and the ancient builders, one of the things that I believe the ancient builders were trying to do with their megalithic constructions is they were trying to say the locals did not do this. There's no way they could have done this. These straight-sided, sometimes curved, but perfectly matching, granite blocks we can't do today without extreme effort. And they did hundreds of these. They just did them like it was
the question that comes up, though, both for those cases and for the triangular UFO that you're talking about, is if that was their purpose, wouldn't there be more straightforward ways of sending that message to us instead of making us wonder what was going on?
Yes, there would be. Absolutely. Sure. But consider this. Maybe they tried to do that before and we shot it down. I mean, we know that the Roswell crash was a crash. We don't know what caused it. Theories range from intense radar that we had never used before that interrupted with their systems to just being struck by lightning. Okay, we don't know what made it crash. If the Cape Girardeau incident also happened as described by this reverend on his deathbed, then that one was also broken open and you could see the inside. So something struck it. It may
So if they can be taken down by our weaponry, then they're not that much more advanced than us in theory, right? I mean,
well, it could be that they only fly over us what they consider within our grasp technologically. It would be something where they could lose this amount of technology and it wouldn't help us too much. It's very possible that whatever technology that we have acquired, we still can't quite figure out how to operate. There's a really famous incident that happened in the Texas Pinelands, where these three people, a grandmother, a mother, and her son, were driving through this barren area with pine trees on both sides, all the way up, 30, 40 feet. And a spinning top type UFO came out from a side road and started coming over them and passed over them and irradiated them, apparently, because there was intense heat. And all three of them suffered radiation sickness afterwards. This thing looked like it was going to crash. It was spinning really badly, like a top that was losing its momentum. And after it passed over, more than a dozen double-bladed Chinook helicopters followed it. Okay, so they were coming after it as if it was going to crash and they were going to pick it up. Again, if it happened as it was described, that shows that we're trying to fly some of these things, but we really don't quite have a grasp on it. The descriptions of both the Cape Girardeau incident and the Roswell incident suggest that these smaller than human creatures might connect with their craft in ways that we don't necessarily have. They may have just a way to put hands or fingers or digits onto a control surface and then use psychic energy or their mind power or something to make these craft fly, and we just don't have that.
Well, it's interesting. I'm getting a different sense of your argument for why the aliens don't mean us any harm. So, for instance, when I've watched in some of the other documentaries, you'll hear, say, Michio Kaku. I'm sure I'd mispronounce his name, but he'll say their technology would be so far ahead of ours that if they wanted to destroy us, they easily could. So the fact that they haven't means they don't intend to. But it sounds to me like you're saying something different. You're saying their technology may be closer to us in that at least we're able to shoot them down sometimes. They have engine trouble or crash. They have some difficulties. But I think it sounds like what you're saying is the fact that they haven't tried to shoot any of us down or destroy any missile silos or anything to that effect reveals a good intention, or at least reveals that there's no bad intention, or if there was, there would have been more evidence of it.
Right. I wouldn't go so far as to say they've never tried to shoot us down. In Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret, there is a report from a listening station in Florida that was listening to Cuban, probably Russian pilots communicating about a UFO that they were following. The ground control gave one of the Russian Cuban pilots the ability to engage it and use a missile. And when that command was authorized by the pilot and accepted, his plane blew up.
Yeah.
According to this report, according to this transcript, with nothing apparently having seemingly struck it, and the other pilots decided they weren't going to engage this UFO and took off. It appears the best information that we have is that they are not engaging us militarily if they can help. And it does appear that they have shown extreme interest in our nuclear weapons and our nuclear facilities to the point where they will, just fly around them. The really famous Belgian triangle sightings of the 1980s started off with supposedly a triangular UFO over top of a nuclear weapon storage area for NATO. And this thing was kind of loitering in the area, doing like 100, 150 miles an hour. And when, again, two F-15s were vectored in to take this thing out, it went from 5,000 feet down to less than 1,000 feet and then back up to 1,000 feet and disappeared off a radar for like 3 revolutions of the beam. And then when it came back on, it was 100 miles away, still doing 100 miles an hour. So it's like, they can do technologically pretty much whatever they want. They can, in some instances, possibly show us what they want us to see. I've told people many times the story about John Keel, who was the author of the Mothman Prophecy, and his mentor, whose name was not Ingo Swann. I have to go get his book. His book is behind. Ivan T. Sanderson. He's the guy that created the term ultra-terrestrials because he thought, he was one of the first people that put it in print, he thought it's possible that these might not be from another civilization in a star, but might be from a different dimension, or at least might find it easier to travel through dimensions rather than getting in the car and loading it up and moving to Beverly.
Are you open to that theory?
Well, if this story is true, it answers a lot of questions. So the two of the men and their wives were at Ivan T. Sanderson's place in Ohio, next to the Ohio River, not far from Point Pleasant, where the Mothman sightings were. And the men saw a silver UFO come out of the sky, stop, and start going along at about 100 miles an hour. And they told their wives, "Can you see the UFO?" And the wives couldn't see it. They're like, "It's right there, it's right there." I'm like, "No, we don't see anything." And then it kind of wavered or vibrated or something, and it turned into a little Cessna airplane, still doing the same 100 miles an hour. And the wives were like, "Is it near the Cessna?" And they're like, "No, it is the Cessna." And according to the story, that's what they're able to do. They're able to show us what they want. I know from my personal experiences, they will turn on and turn off at their whim. All they want us to do, you were asking before, why wouldn't they have made more of a splash? Why wouldn't they have been more open about it? We sort of try to impose our human rational way of thinking onto beings who may be thousands or millions of years ahead of us. They may not,
or just very different in their way of, their type of sentience that they have.
They appear to be interested enough in our nuclear weapons that they're trying to tell us, don't play with matches, you're going to burn your house down. It appears to be something like that. There have been a number of instances where fleets of UFOs back in the 60s were seen to be flying out of Russia, apparently a precursor to an all-out nuclear war, where NATO almost launched nuclear weapons in response, and then these things would turn north and go over the North Sea and then just disappear. Either go off of radar or dive into the ocean and goodbye. And the only thing that really stopped us from launching nuclear weapons on at least one of these occasions was these things were doing Mach 4. And we didn't think the Russians had a Mach 4 capable craft in the mid-60s, which I don't think they even do today. But that almost looked like this was a test of us, saying, look how easy it is for you guys to screw up. Maybe you should get rid of these things.